There's a process that's so vital to high-end performance that we see it in nearly every sphere imaginable, from music to sports and even in non-physical pursuits such as learning a language. But it's sorely missing in climbing, and that is a healthy balance between practice and performance. Let's take a look at the mistakes that are holding us back and the methods that we can use to create progress. The first mistake is the great temptation of every climber, and that's starting from the bottom and trying to reach the top of the climb on every single attempt. And it's a huge temptation because in the back of our mind, we're thinking, oh, I'm gonna stick the crux this time and I don't wanna ruin my potential send by not starting from the bottom. But that's like a gambler's mindset, and it doesn't do well for sustainable progress. The problem with always being in this performance-oriented mindset is that the only things that we're gonna learn are the things that come naturally to us. And over time, that's gonna create more and more glaring issues. So resist the temptation to start from the bottom on every single attempt. Instead, break the climb into multiple sections and start working them as sections. Basically, what we want to do is when a climb is difficult for us, we want to use holds from another route to climb our way up to the difficult section and then work it in isolation. Basically, we're finding ways to isolate the difficult moves so that we can practice them. Underpinning this is this sort of mindset shift that you don't get better from sending climbs. Instead, you get better by accomplishing moves. After all, a climb is just a sequence of hard moves, so when we shift our mindset to actually practicing movement, we'll have more tools at our disposal and we'll be able to ward off the long plateaus just a little bit. This method of adding holds to a route to make it more approachable is a powerful way to practice. You take the climb from something that's at your limit to something that's way below it, and then that way you can really rehearse the movement. But there's a flip side of that coin that's also a tremendously helpful way to practice, and that's eliminating holds from easier climbs. This is particularly helpful when you're trying to work on a specific technique. So let's say that you want to become a more dynamic climber. You can take a route that's V1, V0, V2, something that you feel really comfortable that you can control the holds on, and you can eliminate the majority of the holds from that climb and then do these massive lunges to the jugs that you've picked out from the ground, or even just kind of lunge as far as you can. This method of eliminating holds from easier climbs is such a great way to practice dynamic climbing, and I also love it for practicing things like a high foot rockover because you know that the holds are something you feel comfortable with. Eliminating holds from easier climbs is a great way to practice. Really quickly, I want to dive into what makes effective practice. We've heard a lot that mastery in a given domain is a result of 10,000 hours, but that's an oversimplification. The actual research says that to become a master in a given domain, you need 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, which is focused, intentional, structured practice. Something that most people, according to the study, can only do for about 15 minutes a day. So when it comes to practice, it's something that the sooner you can start it, the better. Because if you can only accrue about 15 minutes at a time, and you're trying to work your way up to 10,000 hours, yeah, you're gonna wanna start soon. The cool thing is, the more that we engage in deliberate practice, the more our mind is able to handle more of it. So while a beginner can probably only get about 15 minutes of quality practice in, people who are professional athletes or professional musicians can sometimes get in hours a day. Of course, at that level, the return on investment is much slower and more marginal, but there's something beautiful about the idea of trying to master the art of practicing, because practice is something that can help you in climbing, but also in your career. I use practice to help me become a professional musician and a professional filmmaker. And even now, as I'm talking to this camera, I'm practicing how to be a YouTuber. So it's really important to kind of befriend this relationship with the process of practice. Okay, so moving back into climbing, because I think that's what you're here for. With that idea of practice in mind, the next method is really simple. It's structure your session. So have a goal going into your session. Do you want to get better at crimps? Well, why don't you focus on just crimpy climbs on that day? Do you want to get better at overhang or slab climbing? Structure a session that is mostly in those domains. Even though it's not a drill, it's still very important because you're going in with a specific aim and you are practicing, not performing at your limit, but you are practicing in an area which you have determined that you're weaker than you would like to be. At the end of the day, all of this practice really comes down to this one last skill. And without this last skill, everything else is kind of pointless. And that's knowing how to perform when it is time. When we practice, we create this other category in our mind where our brain says, okay, so when it's time to perform, I'm gonna try hard. So there is something I actually read on the Climb Harder Reddit that I thought was really interesting. And the person was talking about that they had this ritual that when they grabbed onto the wall, they would tell themselves, engage. It was just this mental cue that they knew that at this moment they were gonna try as hard as possible. It's super important, especially when climbing at harder levels, that you segue from the practice and learning mode into the performance mode. Think of a boxer. Like when a boxer is sparring, it's gonna be very different than when the crowd is roaring and the lights are on and they're in front of their opponent. It's important that even though those same pressures don't exist in the climbing gym, hopefully no one's there to punch you in the face, even though those same pressures don't exist, it's important to shift our mind from practice into performance. So the final thing I'll leave you with is try to create a method, a ritual that works for you in order to really segue into the performance mode for a given attempt. Over time, that space of performance will become a more and more defined space that allows you to try harder and harder. One of the key differentiators of these high-end climbers is just how hard they can try. But I don't think that we get to that level of trying hard by trying hard all the time, because we just don't have the physical resources to always be operating at that level. Instead, if we really delegate the majority of our climbing to practice and learning, and we really sharpen this skill of performing when the time comes, with time, we'll develop a stronger level of laser-like focus when it comes to performance mode. So I hope you're convinced that practice is something that you should implement. If you don't know where to start or what to practice, then check out this video I made on 5 common climbing mistakes. And if you are making any of those, start to practice to eliminate them. Other than that, thank you so much for being here. Please give this video a like and subscribe. It helps out tremendously for the algorithm, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.